I'd figured it out, a way to make money, a place to live, the rug was pulled out from under me. I'm Hava, and in this video, I'm continuing the story of how I got started in New York City by myself without a job and without a place to live. If you haven't seen part 1 of the story, you might want to go back now and see how I waded through my first 3 months pet sitting. Of course, you can continue this video if you want, but just know that you're jumping into the middle of the narrative. And if you're here from part 1, welcome back, and thanks for taking such a high interest in my story. Like I said in part 1, in order to tell you the full story, I took notes, which honestly turned into a word-for-word narrative, on my computer so that I would remember all the details, and I will be reading and referencing it throughout this video. So, if it wasn't clear enough from the experiences I described in the last video, the first 3 months were taxing, and by the end of September, I was desperate for some detox time. So when I flew home this time, I decided I would take about a month off. And by off, I don't mean that I stopped working at my tutoring business. In fact, I was continuing to throw myself into it because I was growing it to a higher level to serve as my bread and butter while I figured out how to make my content creation work. What I mean by off is not dealing with the everyday struggles I was facing in New York City, especially with my constant change of location, which was kind of like starting over every time in terms of figuring out basics like groceries and commutes. In Houston, I spent my days tutoring, planning, learning, and yes, sometimes just simply relaxing. I spent lots of time with my animal friends and enjoyed my family time on weekends. My boyfriend Sam came to town and we went to our friend's wedding in Austin. I also apartment hunted, which if you're familiar with New York City real estate, you know that doing this remotely is tricky, not at times risky business. As a self-employed person, this is especially tricky because I cannot provide the typical proof of income such as pay stubs, offer letters, etc. that are often requested. So I found my options limited to what's known as co-living. This is basically where tenants rent through a company that serves as a property manager rather than from the landlord directly. Each tenant is on his or her individual contract and therefore isn't bound to the other tenants in any way on the lease or sublease technically. This was also good for me because I didn't have anyone to search for an apartment with. And there are a handful of co-living companies in New York City and I exhausted my research on them looking for a place that would fit my budget and location priorities. Even though, as you'll see in a second, I ended up with something awesome, I wasn't choosy on amenities because I simply didn't have enough room after all the other limitations to be set on that. Although I did really want a dishwasher. We can chat more about New York City apartment hunting in another video, especially now that I've done it twice. Teaser for the next video in this series. Drop a comment if New York City apartment hunting is something you want me to cover, because otherwise, I don't know if I will. Before I left, I knew upon my return that I wouldn't be pet sitting anymore. It was time to find a steady place to live. In addition to constantly figuring things out all over again, it was also stressful to not know if I'd have a place to stay so close to when I needed it, just a couple weeks out, and whether I'd have to spend money on an Airbnb for a gap, and even a day or two gap meant hauling my stuff all around the city again, and again, I had too much stuff, and it's exhausting. I think that this is the kind of thing I could have a blast doing and would love if that was the intention. But since my intention was to find a steady way to live, this was not fun. So I actually started reaching out to companies during that Crown Heights pet sit because I made this decision at the same time as my decision to go off on my own career-wise, and I even had an in-person tour in an apartment in East Williamsburg with one company, even though it didn't turn out to be the place that I went with. Another company informed me of an upcoming availability in Williamsburg, which by the way is a different neighborhood than East Williamsburg. They weren't giving in-person tours, but I had the address, so I went to the place just to see if I could get any kind of sign that it's legit by standing out in front of it. A guy arriving home on his motorcycle noticed me peering inside the gate and asked if he could help me. I explained the situation, and to my surprise, he offered to let me into his apartment to look around. I accepted his offer, and through conversations with him, I learned that this is a legit company and got some honest feedback about his time as a tenant. There were about 4 buildings next to each other that were possible for the availability, so I didn't know if his building was the one I would be in, but this was just reassurance that I wasn't about to be doomed. Anyway, I flew back to Houston shortly thereafter, and after a couple more video calls and knowing that my first choice, being with a different company and over in Hell's Kitchen, didn't have any availability, I discovered what later became my first apartment in New York City through the company whose building I got to see the insides of thanks to that nice tenant. Another great thing about co-living is that most, if not all, of these companies offer short and or flexible lease durations. Even though I got a brief look around an example of one of the company's apartments, since I basically had to trust photographs sent by email from an employee at this company, and I'd never done co-living before, I decided to sign a 3-month lease, and then, assuming I liked it, upon the end of my 3-month lease, I would extend it by a long period. And when my lease came up for renewal, I did sign for an additional 11 months, taking me all the way into January of 2023. The earliest move-in date was November 18th, so even though it was 2.5 weeks later than I originally planned to return to the city, I took it. And it turned out that the extra time in Houston was pretty nice. That said, because of the plans I made to produce Hava's New York, including a title sequence that I didn't want to misrepresent the show by being all wintry themed, I knew the time was ticking for me to get back to New York to film some episodes. Side note, if you want to experience lots of sights and things to do in New York City virtually, Hava's New York is your golden ticket. Or if you're planning a trip to New York City and you want to make sure you spend your time doing the stuff that's most fun for you, this is a way to find out which activities are going to be worth your time and money. So I looked for affordable accommodations to head up about a week before my move-in date, and I discovered that my best bet for November 11th to 18th was a charitable vegetarian Airbnb in Chelsea. I paid about $533 for 7 nights there, and I loved knowing that a portion of the money would go toward the owner's organization to feed the homeless. I puzzled my luggage that I brought for moving into a room, it was more like a pod, that was approximately 4 feet 6 inches by 6 feet 1 inch, which comes out to about 27 square feet. Yes, I measured it myself. I was so curious. Guests are permitted to scoot over luggage in the common area, but because I had all my stuff and was moving, I opted to bring it all into my room where I could lock it when I wasn't there. There was a communal bathroom and living area, and the living room had a fridge where I could store some food with my name on it, and because of my budget, I needed to use it. Someone did eat some of my food though, which was really weird. I didn't have anything super desirable. That week I pretty much lived on PB&J, cereal, and carrots. The biggest downside of the Airbnb, although I guess it's an upside in some ways, is that it's a 24-hour quiet zone. Brief phone calls are allowed, but as someone who tutors virtually, video calls with students for hours at a time, the day I got back to New York City, I found myself with a 3-hour time crunch from the time of my arrival to the start of my tutoring sessions to find a space in the city that was open late into the evening, had Wi-Fi, had an atmosphere in which my talking wouldn't disturb other people, and that charged a low cost. Because I didn't find this out until I got there. After walking all over the place and calling various establishments, I remembered a spot that Sam and I had stumbled into when he visited me. Starbucks Reserve Roastery. It's by far the biggest Starbucks location I've ever seen. Although it worked in a pinch, it really wasn't the easiest setup due to the background noise and no outlets for public use, so luckily my devices were charged up that day and didn't die until my work was over. Later, I found another Starbucks nearby, one that did have outlets for public use, but one day, this location announced that they were closing an hour earlier than scheduled, and they made this announcement just 30 minutes before they were gonna close. I was in the middle of a tutoring session, of course being paid for my time. Luckily, it was my last session of the night because I had to pause the session, figure out another place to go, and found myself running up 7th Ave to another Starbucks where I could finish my work for the night. Speaking of work, the whole reason I got to New York City a week ahead of my lease start date was to film a few episodes to use in the title sequence of Hava's New York. So I got to work planning episodes and then filming them. The first bunch included Times Square, Rockefeller Center, Top of the Rock, and the High Line. Then, I edited my videos at that second Starbucks I found and discovered that I could work much more efficiently than I have in the past when it comes to editing. My thoughtful episode planning helped me tighten the editing process, so my heart opened up to all the experiences I can and will cover for my audience. Anyway, my drive was on fire. I got to Starbucks early in the morning, usually before 8 a.m., and left at closing time, which was after dark, around 8 p.m., I'm pretty sure. I worked on my videos and then rolled right into tutoring. I took breaks to use the bathroom and order food at meal times. This location had a wonderful upstairs area tucked away from all the hubbub where I could work without being disturbed or disturbing anyone else. Another highlight of that week was that I had an aunt passing through, not the same one repeatedly mentioned in the previous video, and we got together for breakfast one day. I think it's becoming apparent that I'm a total family girl, and that's not just immediate family either. Then, November 18th rolled around, I gathered all my luggage, ordered an Uber, and rode across the Williamsburg Bridge to my new home on the south side of Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Which, by the way, here's a little bit of trivia. If you look at addresses in this area, you'll find that they say Brooklyn, New York as though it's a separate city. It's not. It has something to do with the postal zoning and the fact that Brooklyn was once an independent city, but I don't really know all the details. So if you know the details and can provide a clear explanation in a comment, that would be great. When I walked into the building and then up the stairs, I found myself entering the very apartment that tenant had welcomed me into. And then I discovered that he lived in the bedroom next to mine. How's that for things working out just right? Okay, so I kind of figured this out ahead of time because He and I had exchanged information when we met because he kindly offered to answer any of my other questions that I may have had. Then I saw his name on the lease when I signed it and reached out to him. Oh, and yes, this was a co-ed living situation. In fact, I was the only female in the apartment, aside from girlfriends who came to hang out with their boyfriends, for the first 2 months of my living there. The room I found was approximately 157 square feet with high ceilings. Huge. I know. In a 5-bedroom, 2.5-bathroom duplex. I had a dishwasher, in-unit laundry, and lived on the 2nd floor of the building. I was just a 4 to 5 minute walk from the Marcy Avenue subway station, which was only 1 stop away from Manhattan via the J and M trains. If you want to see a full tour of the apartment and find out exactly what I paid for monthly rent, go ahead and click right up here or watch it later by clicking the link in the description. So, back to move-in day. I set all my stuff down, ran a few errands, and got connected to the Wi-Fi. Then I sat on the floor to tutor at the little bedside table. Luckily, the place came furnished, minus desk. Afterwards, nighttime at this point, I got a few groceries at the overpriced yet conveniently located C-Town down the street. Meanwhile, talking on the phone to my parents angrily about a new client who'd refused to pay me for the hour of time I just worked for them. Needless to say, I haven't worked with them since, but this was an awful thing to happen the night of my move. I mean, I was grocery shopping at 9 p.m. because of this. That week, and the following weeks, were filled with more setting up. I way underestimated the time it would take me to deep clean my room because the room didn't come clean as promised, purchase a couple extra pieces of furniture, rugs, etc., arranging my stuff, and still maintaining my life. And even now, it just doesn't sound like as much work as it actually was. Unfortunately, at the same time as trying to move in and get settled, I was being pummeled by challenges. None too big on their own, but put together, I just couldn't catch a break. If something could go wrong, it did. I experienced Murphy's Law at its finest, and at some point, I just had a meltdown on the phone with my boyfriend because I couldn't take it anymore. Everything I typed on this picture happened within a 3-week period. If you pause the video to read it, you'll notice that almost every piece of technology I had failed in some way. It was really rough, and I'm so glad that period of time is behind me. Even though I struggled to get back into my creative work with so many setbacks knocking me down, I was not willing to compromise a neat Thanksgiving experience. After all, I had just gotten back to New York, so affordably and practically speaking, I wasn't going to leave for the holiday. Not knowing what my following Thanksgivings would look like, I decided it would be the perfect year to create an episode for Hava's New York around the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade and a vlog of Thanksgiving experience in New York City. So I did. As I got back on my feet, I started producing other episodes as well. I'm going to direct you to Hava's New York to see the full list of released episodes. The link is in the description. Even though I don't post them in the order that they're filmed, I do put the date each video was filmed, so you can always look at those details on the various videos to see when I filmed videos as it relates to this story. Though there are still a few that haven't gone public at the time of this recording. December 17th, technically less than a month after my move-in, I flew back to Houston, this time for my sister's college graduation. I enjoyed the family time, and needing more of it, I extended my trip by about a week and stayed till January 2nd. Also, while I was in Houston, my acne journey hit a major moment when my PCP referred me to the dermatologist. This is a story for another day and another time. I'd love to share it with you, so let me know if you're interested. The long story short of this is I started the process of Accutane. Upon my return to New York, I enjoyed my first snow day. That day was fun because it was snowing, and I learned that it doesn't actually snow that much in New York City. It's just cold. Anyway, I continued the process of getting settled by having my first appointments with a GYN and a dentist here, and both were great. A couple weeks later, I realized that I didn't need my car, and I was pouring money into it through insurance and maintenance, and the market was the best possible for selling a vehicle. The idea first came to my mind on a Friday, and by Sunday morning, I had a couple quotes from car dealers and an appointment booked for one Monday night. I bought a last-minute plane ticket and flew to Houston. Side note, this was my first time buying a ticket so close to departure time that check-in was already available. Selling my car was one of the most exhilarating moments I have ever experienced. It was really a full circle moment for me and a serious commitment to what I'm doing, because selling my car is not reversible, and it was a seller's market, not a buyer's market. Meaning sell it to then turn around and buy one would be a mistake. I'm really glad I worked with AutoNation. Not only did they provide the most competitive offer online, but even after some light negotiation, they bought Pretty Blue for more than any other company even offered in the sight unseen algorithmic online offers. And if I'd have to guess, all offers go down from there once they actually see the car. On top of that, the service I received was great. No weird used car salesman or purchase bin vibes here. Plus, the gentleman conducting the sale with me was professional and personable. I spent a few days in Houston and then flew to New Mexico to visit my boyfriend, where I was on my way all along. During our 3-week visit, we enjoyed the farmer's market, baking and cooking together, binge watching Friends, and celebrating Sam's birthday. I flew back to New York City on a Sunday, and with a layover in Houston, my family came to hang out with me for a couple hours in the airport, and it was so much fun. When I got back to New York, I was excited to start getting into routine and gaining momentum with my creative work. If you watched the previous video covering this story and take a step back, and even if you didn't watch that one, hopefully you're starting to realize that for many months I wasn't settled, and even once I had my own room in an apartment, I wasn't settled. I found my rhythm and enjoyed about a month of solid routine. My sleep cycle was on point, my morning started with exercise, and I produced about 3 videos weekly in addition to my daily Instagram content. It was a really nice month until, seems like there's always an until in this story, it came to a screeching halt. On March 14th, my co-living company notified me and everyone in my apartment, as well as everyone in the buildings, that they would not be continuing to work with the landlord, meaning our subleases would dissolve and we had to move out with a strict deadline of May 31st. To hear about the drama of my second round apartment hunting, devastating mistakes I made because I couldn't keep up with everything going on all at once, and how I got to where I am now, you are not gonna wanna miss part 3. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications, and since this video is all about the past, make sure you follow me on Instagram to see what's up in the present. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.